Welcome to this session. My name is Kande Yumkela. I've done many things in my career, UN, Director General of UNIDO, also pioneer CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, and of course a great partner with the European Union with several initiatives over the last 2 decades. Today we're meeting here to discuss the rollout of the Africa EU Green Energy Initiative. This whole COP27 is the Africa COP. We want to focus on practical action, practical programs that will in fact indeed solve climate change, but at the same time ensure a just, equitable transition. We're very pleased to put together a good panel for you in cooperation with the Africa Europe Foundation to look into how we can roll out and implement the Africa EU Green Energy Initiative. I'll introduce each speaker as I call them to take the floor. We'll have initial introductory remarks, 5 minutes each from our speakers, then we'll have some exchange on the panel, and then we'll see if we still have time to invite some questions and comments from the audience. We'll start with the European Union to tell us a little bit more what is the content of the Africa EU Green Energy Initiative, the plans they have, and how this will be rolled out over the next few years. It is my pleasure to invite Mr. Stefano Sinori, who is representing Carla Montesi, who is the Director for the Green Deal and Digital Transition at the European Commission. Stefano, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Kande. Good morning, everybody. Really happy to be here in this panel this morning. Thanks to the friends of the Africa Europe Foundation for the organization. So we are here to speak about energy and Africa. We know that energy, of course, is very much discussed at COP because of the role in terms of emission for mitigation objective. But let's be honest, when we speak about energy in Africa, it's not really about mitigation. It's about providing the continent with affordable, sustainable energy that can sustain the economy, the households, productive uses, but also to support human development, health, education, transportation, clean cooking, etc. I think it's always good to start from this assumption. Now, let me say that the cooperation on energy between the European Union and Africa has really been very, very important in the last few years. Let me mention some numbers. We have mobilized 3 billion euro under the EU budget in the previous financial framework, 11 billion with our EU partners, member state, financial institution, European Investment Bank. And we have achieved quite remarkable results. We have helped install some 10 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity. We have brought access to some 18 to 20 million people in the continent. So the basement, let's say the foundations are good, but we want, of course, under the new financial framework and the new political cycle, we want to go even at a higher scale. So it is how the Africa Europe Green Energy Initiative, let's say, is created. In particular, it is launched on the occasion of the Africa Union, European Union Summit in February in Brussels, where the Global Gateway Investment Package for Africa was launched. I mean, for us, really, the word investment is key. And out of the global offer to our partner countries in the world of mobilizing 300 billion euros as Team Europe in the next few years, out of this, at least half will be mobilized for Africa, which means 150 billion euro in investment in areas like energy, transport, digital, but also education, health, research. Under this investment package, the Africa Europe Green Energy Initiative is one of the flagships. And basically, what are the objectives? The objectives are basically the following. We want to, of course, still keep supporting the production of renewable energy, so to increase the share of renewable energy in the Africa energy mix, but also, of course, to support access. Access remains always a key objective, and also work in the area of energy efficiency. The components of the initiative are the following. Basically, first of all, what we call hard component. This is about infrastructure, let's say transmission, distribution, of course, in support of new generation capacity. And then if time allows, I can happy to provide some examples. But also important what we call the soft component, which is support to regulation, support to, let's say, capacity building, all what has to do with regulatory reforms. You know, the work that we are conducting with the Africa Union Commission on the Africa electricity market, or without an EPAD on the Continental Transmission Master Plan. And of course, within the framework of this initiative, we are also integrating a specific track of works, like, for instance, the Just Energy Transition partnerships with countries like South Africa and Senegal. We have seen yesterday the announcement about the investment package in South Africa, or specific partnerships, for instance, on green hydrogen, like the one that is just being signed at the moment we speak in the Namibian Pavillion on green hydrogen and critical raw materials. Last comment of mine before giving the floor back to you, Kande, is about implementation. Of course, we have been talking about this initiative now already some months, and now really the focus is on implementation. We are working with our colleagues in delegation, with partner financial institutions, with partner countries, in order to identify really projects which have a transformational potential, which can really allow us to go to scale. You know, project like the hydropower plant in Madagascar, in Saofika or Volobé, where we can mobilize a total of 1.8 billion in investment over the next few years with other partner institutions. Projects where we can connect different countries, you know, as I said, the transmission lines. So for us, it's really important now to use the time to work with our partner institution, financial institution, partner countries, to see what are the projects can be mature and impactful in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Because we know that when we talk about energy, it takes time. Projects take time. You don't put in place an energy project in a few months. At the same time, we see that the pressure is on us to go ahead with tangible projects that can hit the ground in a relatively short lapse of time. So this is the challenging phase of us. We are committed. We want to work with everybody that can contribute to this endeavor. And of course, we very look forward to bringing, let's say, first results of it in the next conversation. So thanks a lot. I stop here. Back to you.
It's obvious that 2.4 billion is a down payment. You're looking for partnerships with the European Investment Bank, I'm sure, to leverage some additional funds. Marcos Brandt, Acting Managing Director of the Global Directorate at the European Investment Bank. Marcos, Africa needs, for generation alone, about 50 billion per year, not to add maintenance, which is probably another 20 billion per year. So 2.4 billion, I see Stefano looking at you, hoping you'll help him leverage. How do you see the rollout?
Thank you, Kande. I think it's important to keep in mind there's two different numbers indeed, right? You were talking about 2.4 billion, which is budget funds, and then the other number was 150. So now this is where's the magic of how do you get from 2.4 to 150? I think that's very important. And indeed, I think the key word there is leverage, and we have done this for the last 50 years, so we have experience with it. So it's not some magic that we are kind of some voodoo science. It's something we have done, right? With these budget funds, what we do is we support, we de-risk investment projects. We take certain risks out of the projects so that we can then use the capital of the European Investment Bank and other development finance institutions to leverage two ways. First, an internal leverage by having the budget support. We can raise bonds on the capital market to enhance significantly the financing that we can do. For example, we have a long-standing program, the so-called external lending mandate is also the first window that we have now signed under NDICI with the European Commission, where we leverage each euro about 11 times. So it's not an insignificant amount. And so you get very quickly to very high figures. But then the second very important leverage is on the project level itself. By being a cornerstone investor in some of these transformative projects, we aim to bring in other partners that can rely on us, on our joint assessment of the project, on our quality control, to make sure that each and every single project that we finance is making sense from all perspectives. It's economically viable, it's financially viable, it is social, it generates the social benefits, and it makes technological sense. And that's because we are having a very rigid assessment of every single project. Sometimes that goes against the aspect of time that you mentioned, but on the other hand, it does provide this quality assurance, and that's where we bring another, very often around another factor of 3 times of leveraged funds outside. And I think together, so that's the mechanism that has worked and that will continue to work. And I think what's new now is, first of all, I think we're more explicit about it. We communicate more. We have put more money into it, most importantly, the European Union. And what we're also trying to do is to benefit from the fact that we have a lot of European players. So it's not only the European Commission and the European Investment Bank, but there's many other important European players like KfW, AFD, and others. So we're trying to partner with the whole ecosystem of financing partners in this so-called Team Europe approach, which makes us very confident that we will reach the 150 billion that were mentioned. Now, the important thing is, of course, that we will have sufficient financing and we have investable projects. So that's where the partnership is very important.
But that's where we have the headache, right? Investable projects. How do we get those projects? Exactly. Usually that's the big bottleneck. The money is there, but getting those projects that are also bankable is usually a bottleneck.
Yes, thanks. And that's exactly where I want to go. So that means you cannot put all of this money only into financing. You need to put money directly in the upstream project development and in the capacity building and working with our partners. You also need to have an honest and open policy dialogue. What are the needs? How do we address them together? You have to look at market integration, which is very important because a lot of efficiencies and benefits come from market integration. You have transmission grids that you have to set up, and you have to be very open and honest in your assessment of how to do it, and then you can generate these investable projects.
If I may go back to Stefano for a minute. Stefano, how will this money move? Mainly through the EIB or also through delegations?
Well, this really depends. Let's say there is no one size fits all. Of course, the bulk of our money is channeled through national programs, and the way of managing and implementing the programs really depends on the choices that are made by our delegation in conversation with the partner country. So there are cases where you can even do some budget support, others where you go for delegated cooperation. But of course, when we talk about big infrastructure, transmission, distribution, or hydro power plant, of course, this is through blending and guarantee. So it is by pulling together investment grants with, of course, the loans coming from the financial institution. This is how you can, of course, mobilize the few hundred millions that are needed to support big projects. If you then talk about, for instance, project for rural electrification, which we also do in a number of countries, that is different because perhaps you put 15 or 20 million to cover a few communities, a few villages, and this is of course a different scale. But this is also important to do. And if we, let's say, work in the area of regulation, capacity building, we can mobilize our technical assistance facility. We have experts that we can deploy. Or in certain cases, we are really programmed that support, let's say, reform or regulation. So I would say it really depends.
Okay.
It fits to the needs of the specific country cases.
Carlos, you're doing a mega project in Mozambique. You hear the rollout of this initiative. Probably you have full funding for your project already. If I remember, it's about 1,500 megawatts, one of the big ones. How do you see interfacing with this new initiative? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, thank you. First of all, thanks to invite us in this forum and to share some of our experience and also what our plans going forward. I think we start from the strategic level. Of course, Mozambique has been pursuing the universal access by 2030. For that, in 2016, Mozambique came up with a new electrification strategy, which addresses both on-grid and off-grid, which addresses both conventional power and renewable power. Because of the huge natural resources, natural resources, renewable, we are also pursuing a green industrialization process because we do have the second largest aluminum factory in Mozambique, and it's a country blessed with a lot of mineral resources also to pursue the industrialization and bring green products online. Second, of course, we have a long-standing partnership with European Investment Bank and European Union, and we are in dialogue and contact with the institution in Mozambique, and also to leverage on what we call, in terms of the large-scale new renewable generation, the Mpandankuwa project, up to 1,500 watt, which you just mentioned. So for that, we are also using leveraging through the experience of Teman, which we leverage 5.6 times, and also bringing de-risk instruments, concessional funding, grant funding, and also to enable some technical assistance to make sure that we contribute substantially for the just energy transition, but not only at the Mozambique level, but also at the regional level. The reason is because Mozambique is very well integrated to the region. It's around 6,000 megawatt regional integration through the existing transmission lines. Just to mention that inside Mozambique, we don't have that capacity. We are developing this capacity also through the European Investment Bank and European Union, but we already have a good footprint to the regional market. So by having that good footprint, we need to make sure that we bring the energy transition to make sure that we can do not only the green industrialization, but also decarbonize the grid and the regional market. So this is what we already started. By doing that, our universal access program, we had around 28% electrification ratio in 2017. 2022, we are like 44% because we moved from 150 new connection into 350 new connections per year now. And this is blessed by our cooperating partners like European Union, the World Banks, AFDB and others, which are supporting this program. So the big challenge now is really move into the green industrialization, which for us it's important to have also access to what I've mentioned, the grant and the concessional funding, but also to carbon credits, right? Yeah. And to go have access to these carbon credits, we need to make sure that we get support by the EU and other institutions to make sure that we have the skills and the institutional capability to make sure that not only we leverage, but we take advantage of these credits. But also it's important that we have clarity and position by EU in terms of the buying position of those carbon credits. In a nutshell, this is more or less what I could share. Thank you.
Anna Beranek, Global Head of Communications and Government Affairs, Siemens Gamesa. As you hear this, private sector, how do you see a company like yours taking advantage of this new opportunity?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kande. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting Siemens Gamesa to the Africa Europe Foundation. Siemens Gamesa has been a leader in the renewable energy industry for more than 3 decades, and we have more than 127 gigawatts of offshore and onshore wind installed around the world. And also when it comes to Africa, we are pioneers on the continent with a project in Somalia in 1989. And currently we have an installed wind power capacity of 4.2 gigawatt in 10 countries in Africa. So we have a leading position and a market share of 50%. But currently only 8 gigawatts are installed of wind power in Africa on a continent with 1.4 billion people. And if you want to compare to where we have our headquarters in Spain, it's 47 million people who live in that country and 28 gigawatt. So I think there's still a lot to do here. When it comes to wind, so wind projects are really rapidly deployable. So the technology can be built really fast, and they provide homegrown, clean and competitive energy security for all. Also, wind drives down the cost of the electricity generated, making it affordable and sustainable. And there are also already some good examples of countries here in Africa with a high ambition to drive the green energy revolution, such as Morocco with a 52% renewable energy target by 2030, and Egypt with a 35% renewable energy target by 2042. However, as I mentioned, I think the potential is much bigger than that. So a report launched by the IFC and the World Bank stated that there's a total potential of 59,000 gigawatts for wind energy in Africa. And now the question is, Kande, what could be done? So from our side, there's a clear need for governments to enact the appropriate policies and enable, that's above all the most important thing, large-scale investments in wind as a key building block for green economic development. By 2030, 90% is expected to come from national grids on the African continent, and energy demand is set to triple by 2040, while the population will be doubling. So as you see in the numbers, there are lots of challenges also we need to overcome. So in order to be successful, in a nutshell, the wind value chain needs a long-term vision. It needs to have predictable visibility in terms of long-term investment decisions. So stable regulatory frameworks in terms of partnerships, both among public stakeholders as well as between the public and private sector. Those partnerships can create stability, enabling investment decisions and making the bankability of large-scale projects visible. That's one point. Another one is inflation in many countries make the predictability also very difficult of the potential projects. And in addition, we need regulation for hybrid projects combining wind and photovoltaic and storage to increase capacity factors. Now, what is important, and that has been mentioned by some of you before, is that countries need to set realistic objectives and start small and then scale up to make market volumes transparent to avoid this discrepancy between climate ambition and the current market capacity for building new installations that we have. And this visibility will give more planning and investment security to developers and thus also to the entire wind value chain. And so a clear project pipeline, to summarize, is a must. Our industry cannot survive on one-off projects, and volumes are key also for us to develop local content. For this to happen, it is very critical for us to improve and accelerate the approval of wind power plant permits. That's, I think, the biggest issue of the whole wind industry is that permitting is not fast enough. And this is hindering the delivery of wind power projects. When it comes to funding, there's a huge investment appetite, as you all know, for wind projects in Africa from European and also global players through the, as mentioned, 2.4 billion for the AEGEI initiative. But what we also need is to get African investors involved in renewable energy projects on the continent. So this will be crucial. And finally, a proper planning and massive investment in the electrical grid. We also mentioned that here before, infrastructure is necessary to increase the interconnection also between countries and stabilize the grid. And this is where we also see a strong added value for initiatives like the AEGEI. So for us, in a nutshell, it presents a great opportunity to focus on the development of cohesive and also inclusive policies, streamlining permitting schemes, and fostering multilateral renewable energy partnerships and trade agreements, and investing in the acceleration of renewable electricity grid construction. So there's a clear opportunity for Africa to boost the local supply chain of wind, which will also bring socio-economic factors and benefits to the local communities, by also increasing the country's energy security and contributing to global efforts to climate change. And we at Siemens Gamesa will be happy to collaborate with the Africa-Europe Foundation, with the AEGE, and all other stakeholders involved in making this a success for Africa and Africa. Thank you, Kande.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us about the challenge. Demand will triple by 2040. Population will also double, 2-point-something billion. So this is like a down payment, this initial initiative, 2.4 billion. So right. I come to you, Glenn. Glenn Pierce-Oroz, Senior Director, International Relations and Special Projects for Sustainable Energy for All. You are mandated by the Secretary General of the UN to look at SDG 7 and how fast we're moving. Are you confident with what you're hearing now that we're really scaling fast, given the challenge Anna mentioned?
Thank you very much, Kande, and thanks to Africa-Europe Foundation as well for organizing this session, which is extremely important because, yes, the Africa-Europe Green Energy Initiative is going to be a very important piece, but it won't be enough. And I'd like to just frame a very quick reality check, which is the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan that was launched earlier this year, I should say, estimated a cost of $410 billion over 10 years. The Ghana president yesterday shared some costs for the Ghana energy transition framework that they have outlined, $561 billion. And so when faced with that type of investment need, I think it's incumbent on the global community here and throughout COP27 to really rethink what is the commitment that the global community is ready to make to countries when they start putting together their analytics, start putting together their planning processes, start costing out in good faith, because the global community is saying this is what has to happen, this is what should happen, and they're saying, okay, these are the costs that we'll be facing. And it's not just hard infrastructure, and I recognize and would like to underscore that Stefano made this point very clearly. There will be analytical work that's needed. There will be capacity building that's needed. There will be planning that's needed, regulatory reforms, policy reforms. There needs to be a strong grant mechanism in the type of financing that is being provided to these countries in order to make these investments as sustainable as possible. And my last point, Kande, along these lines, is the importance of engaging at a political level on these issues. It's much more than engineering, than construction of infrastructure. These are major shifts in the economies that are taking place, major strategic choices that only political leaders can make. And so the AEGEI needs to find ways of really engaging with, docking with other political actors in Africa to truly make these investments as sustainable as possible.
Stefano, I come back to you. As I hear this, he's saying we need more grant dimension to this, to get those regulations in place, political engagement. How is the EU reflecting on that? That political drive for the regulations that Siemens needs to be in place for the investments to come in.
Yeah. No, look, of course, we are here at COP, so it's clear that we see this pressure on us in terms of course, mobilizing more grant money to be able to support, of course, with let's say, real money, a number of things. And from that perspective, of course, we acknowledge that. We know that the European budget is subject to a lot of pressure to fund, from, let's say, COVID response to health education, human development, and a number of other, of course, digital, etc. But I think that, in my view, what is key is also what has been just mentioned now, that, irrespective of the amount of money, what is important is that you have credible plans. Because, if you need to mobilize so many hundreds of billions, you will never make just with the grant funding. It will always remain relatively small compared to the overall size. So I think it's more important that you get it right in terms of where you put your money, and then that you are sure that basically together with all the other actors, because I agree very much, of course, it's important for us to consolidate the European offers together with our partner institution, European Investment Bank, EBRD, member state financial institution, but of course we are not there alone. We just signed an MOU with Power Africa a few weeks ago. We want to cooperate with, of course, the UN agencies, with everybody which in a given country or in a given region is able to mobilize finance, to mobilize means. But in the end, let's say, if you have a utility which is losing hundreds of millions per year, you will never make it. You need to have situations in which, the utility is in a healthy financial state, where that can support investment plan over the years, attract investment, have a relatively decent investment grade, because otherwise, you will not make it only with grant funding. I'm not saying grant funding is not needed, because it is, but at the same time, you need to have an investment climate, a regulatory environment which allows to sign IPPs, to have, let's say, investors coming from abroad and support the energy transformation. And perhaps another element that I would also like to flag is that I think many times we focus a lot on, rightly so, we focus a lot on generation, because of course we know we need to generate, to install more capacity. But let's also be careful in terms, of distribution, last mile, because otherwise we risk to have a lot of African countries producing a surplus, which we will not know what to do about. So you need to balance very, very carefully the new generation with the possibility to invest in transmission distribution. And the key element there is how to attract private capital in support of transmission distribution infrastructure. It's not an easy issue, it's a complicated one, but it's again an area where we need really to work.
So
Thanks.
maybe we pull in Carlos. Carlos, you're there in Mozambique, next to a very energy-hungry South Africa, right? I'm sure you want to sell some of that power from that hydro dam to South Africa. So
Yes.
this interconnection issue that he just raised.
If you look Mozambique, we have been always exporting more than the national consumption. So there's more than 30 years track record on that.
Okay.
Mozambique has built in new capacity around 975 megawatts from 2014 all the way up to 2024, which the 450 megawatt under construction will be finalized. So within the period of 10 years, you have this additional capacity. So that is will allow Mozambique to position as a regional energy hub. And because the energy mix of the energy hub is very much constituted by the hydro resources, so that's where we believe that we can really potentiate Mozambique into contribute to the energy transition. So you will see, I'll use the opportunity to invite at 15:45, the president of Mozambique will be on the NDC partnership to unpack much more of this, together with Tony Blair and President Adesina from AFTB and other special dignitaries. And you are all invited to go and see the commands and the big policy and politics around what I'm trying to unpack.
You're talking a lot about the hydro, but everybody knows you have that rich gas field, right?
Yes.
How is that going? How does that fit into your transition plan?
Yeah, it's a complement because I'll say that the energy gas, we do have gas to power, but at the moment our LNG is more on the LNG front, exports. So it will be a fuel for the transition of the transition. Why the hydro plants, which takes a bit of more time, but we do have like 15,000 gigawatt potential on the Zambezi basin, and of which only around 2,075 is already explored. So there's quite a huge potential to still develop, and that's where the Mpanakwa comes on the big picture. And of course, you know the impact of being able to export on a deficit market. It's very good for Mozambique currency and economic stability, of course, apart from the LNG export. But again, if you look at 25 years ago, Mozambique has been exporting quite substantially.
Marcos, I want to come back to you. Friendly critique I want you to give us. Countries complain about the time. Stefano also mentioned the time it takes to roll projects out. What would you recommend to either the countries like Mozambique or to EU itself? How do we accelerate implementation?
Well, thank you for putting me on the spot. No, first of all, I do agree that time is critical right now, because we are facing increased energy prices, and and at the same time we need to provide the energy that we mentioned to Africa and other regions, and therefore we really have to speed up in order to make sure that we don't invest in assets that ultimately would not be conducive to the transition that we all aim for. That's precisely why we do need a lot of speed right now. Okay, to the question, I think the plans that Glenn mentioned are excellent, excellent examples of countries trying to establish a coherent and consistent approach forward. And then, of course, and you need this basis for that discussion, and you need them as fast as possible so you can have that discussion. And maybe there are ways to prioritize. Maybe you don't need the entire 561 billion in Ghana, but you need certainly hundreds of billions in any case. But you need to be very clear and have a basis to have that discussion. And then ultimately, I think we will not get around. So around this plan, I think we can have that discussion, and then you will need to provide the investment framework and the reliability. Otherwise, you cannot. We can do whatever we want with grants, even with promotional banks, but ultimately, these investments are high return investments, because if we get this right, we get energy. The energy that we produce will generate a massive boost to GDP, to socio-economic development, and so on. So there is a huge upside, and in order to get it, you do need to provide that stability and that predictability and that the ability for investors to go in. There's no way for us to complement that. We can do whatever we want as public institutions. So I think that is having a credible plan, but then also provide a credible a framework to implement this plan, and good prioritization will help us speed up. But we have to be self-critical, I think, Stefano, us as well. We have to speed up our own internal processes as well. I mean, we need to, there's no time to lose right now. And this conference is one of the make or break conferences.
Marcos says planning is important. Siemens also says it's important. Glenn, you are doing about 6 more integrated plans, but mainly philanthropic money. What about the EU? You don't want to partner with the EU to help them roll out this initiative?
Absolutely. I think there's room for these partners to come in. What we're seeing is that the philanthropies, and we have generous support from the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, as well as Bloomberg Philanthropies, to start doing this upstream work as quickly as possible. And this goes to the time element. And if we can help countries put together these plans as quickly as possible, hopefully that buys time or gives time to some of our partners at the EIB or at the EC to be able to put together their financing proposals on the backs of these plans, which I agree will be perhaps different levels of what is being estimated, and they will change over time. And this is why this political buy-in and this political leadership is extremely important, because this has to continue, and it has to continue on the right track. If I could, I'd like to just point out one opportunity for the Africa-Europe Green Energy Initiative, which is there an opportunity to link it with what COP27 presidency is proposing? Next week, they will launch the Africa Just and Affordable Energy Transition, designed by African countries, for African countries. This could be a very powerful link, Stefano, between what the Commission is launching today and what COP27 is launching under African leadership next week.
Well, we have Johan Vanderberg, head of the Secretariat of the Africa-EU Energy Partnership. Johan, are you online now?
I am, yes, Kande.
Okay, you heard Glenn talk about this political engagement and the planning, and that's where you sit in that interface, right?
Correct, yes.
What do you see your role in this new initiative to be?
Yes, thank you very much, Kande, and it's good to be with some known faces and people whom we've collaborated with for a long time. So we've had 15 years now of very successful Africa-EU energy partnership, and I think we're coming to a new phase, and the Africa-EU Green Energy Initiative is really the beginning of that new phase. And it will be one, as we've heard from some of the speakers, where a bigger array of contributors will be necessary, because, as has been said, time is really not our friend. We really need to move quickly. And so I am very encouraged to see the array of public and private actors in the discussion today, and this will be necessary. Also, civil society, we will need to do much more of this. If I can give you maybe just a few of my own impressions, I will wrap up again at the end. But listening to the discussion, Kande, we heard about the political will, and from my perspective and from the Secretariat of the Africa-EU Energy Partnership, being deeply involved in political dialogue on an ongoing basis, we see more and more that climate change is no longer a technical challenge. We have solutions for the problems that we're experiencing, technical ones, and it's a political challenge, and a human and a collaboration challenge that we have to solve. The other thing that emerges, having listened to some of the discussion, is that I think it's going to be very important to do the early steps of these transitions well, so that the economic multipliers can kick in and contribute to the amount of money we need to do what we need to do. I agree very much with the perspective. I think that Stefano mentioned that grid is going to be key, and we really need to build grid now. And Kande, you'll remember also the work of the sustainable energy initiative and platform, and how important grid is going to be to the future there, with time really being of the essence. So let me also wrap up a little bit again at the end, but from the perspective of the Secretariat of the Africa Energy Partnership, I think getting a much broader array of players into our transition efforts is the most important thing we can do now.
And I come back to you. You mentioned the need for African investors to also engage. Apart from North Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, there are not that many big African energy sector investors, are there?
I think what is key is collaboration, and that it's from the African continent. And I'm sure there are large investors available, and it's important from our point of view that it's not just coming from Europe or other areas. So okay. I couldn't tell you which exactly those are. But in the end, I think a close collaboration between all of the players in the industry is of huge importance.
Marcos, I come back to you. I know the EBRD, the EIB, you were all instrumental in building the capital base in Eastern Europe in 20, 25 years ago. Will some of this money also go into building the African financial infrastructure to back the energy transition? You did some of that for Eastern Europe. In my early days, 15, 20 years ago, I know that action took place, strengthening the banks there to engage in energy efficiency and so on.
Certainly. At least, I mean, for us, we can say we have been engaged in Africa for a long time now, but we have, for example, never put as much capital into that region as we have put this year or planning to put in the next years. And that combined with a strengthened mandate from the European Union does allow us to do that. And that money, that capital that we put in there is capital that has been at some point invested in Eastern Europe. So yes, we are serious about it. I think we are at a moment where this acceleration there's no alternative to the acceleration. We urgently rely on plans like the ones that Glenn mentioned and partnerships to scale this up. So we have indeed put serious capital aside in our balance sheet to support this transition, and this capital will flow to Africa, for sure.
Stefano, Team Europe, it is obvious that the Commission can't do this alone. You need the bilaterals as well. Tell us a little bit about this Team Europe approach, leveraging more financing.
Yeah, well, let's say that, Team Europe is really one of the novelties of the current financial framework. It's not that we were not discussing, talking, coordinating with our Team Europe partners before. There was the joint programming. There were a number of instances where we were coordinating, let's say, in country and in Brussels. But now it's really to shift from the idea, okay, we count on what we do ourselves as a Commission, from looking at what we do with all our partners. Sometimes we can put, let's say, a little bit of money, or we are the main contributors, but sometimes we can also support with the policy dialogue, with the different kind of cooperation to unlock investment opportunities. There are occasions in which, you have big investment from, the likes of KfW, AfD, Proparco, FMO, and others, and we can chip in with, covering some part of the equation. And we want to have, let's say, this coordination from the very start, looking at the different programs in which we are investing, so having this ability to connect all the dots that we were not having necessarily in the past MFF. So it was more occasional, it was not organized in a structured way. So this is really one of the key elements, by the way, not only in energy. We are promoting this approach in all the different areas of cooperation, and we really believe it will also provide our partner countries with a more unified, coherent voice, because you will not have, all the different actors coming with different bits and pieces, but actually with the unified offer, let's say, at country level, but this also applies for the regional programs, interconnection, etc. Well, this is our ambition. Of course, it's not easy. It requires a lot of coordination effort from our side, but okay, we are at the start of the process. We are quite confident it will bring, let's say, positive outcomes. Thanks.
Any engagement from the audience? Anybody interested in asking a question of our panel? I see none. Johan, I want to bring you back in. The link with the African Union Commission, the political engagement. Energy issues are still sensitive on the continent. How will you push a little bit more for our leadership to do more of the planning we need, to do more of the regulations that are needed going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Kande. You're quite right. There are some key African energy institutions that are the custodians of the African energy transition. We are extremely encouraged by having seen much closer alignment, much stronger capacity in these organizations in the last few years. We have embedded advisors both at the African Union Commission and at African Union Development Agency, or AUDA NEPAD. But we also see very good progress and alignment with, for instance, African Development Bank, with African Energy Commission, UNECA, African Renewable Energy Initiative, and others. And of course, we're getting now to a new phase of energy partnership between Africa and Europe, manifesting in the Green Energy Initiative. And we think that a closer collaboration will be very important. So we will be working to increase alignment as much as we can. And we think that the institutions will speed up and will be able to carry out their mandates in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to our panel again for some closing remarks. I'll start the other way around. I'll start with you, Glenn.
Perhaps the point that comes to mind right now is putting all of these pieces together. We saw at COP26, we're seeing at COP27 announcements, targets, very important, very much welcome, but we need to start putting the other pieces behind them into play. And I'll go to the other end, which is what Siemens Gamesa will be interested in. Private sector, frankly, is probably less interested in what we'd like to achieve in 2050. They'd like to know, what will we be achieving next year or 6 months from now, so that they can start to put in their processes in place. That's hopefully one way of inverting our thinking and thinking, what are the immediate next steps so that we can get things moving as quickly as possible. That would be my final point, Kande.
Carlos Hume?
No, I think it's important. Mozambique wants to be on the driving seat to contribute for the energy transition, but always having in mind the green industrialization. Yeah. So we are aware of the need for intensive private capital. I mean, out of the 975, 800 megawatts was done on a PPP base. But we are aware that for that we need to have a more conducive regulation framework. And for that, Mozambique have just released a new electricity law. Together with this comes the off-grid regulation to allow private participation also on the renewable space, to enable that electrification, there's a space for even private participation on the electrification process of Mozambique. So that is now the challenge of implementation of the regulatory framework, taking into account the renewable perspective, as well as the different scale of private participation. Because our project has been like a $700 million project. Now we have Mpanangua at $4.5 billion project. So we need to improve the game in terms of the regulatory framework, and also continue, of course, push the institutions like European Union and EIB and others to make sure they can also contribute at a higher level.
Thank you.
But starting with the institutional tax assistance support and make sure that we fast track the energy transition to make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anna?
Thank you. Now, building up on what Glenn said, for us, what is crucial is, goals and targets, ambitions are great, but now it's about implementation. And for wind turbine manufacturers like Siemens Gamesa, what will be crucial now is to accelerate and above all simplify permitting. That will help really go a long way. Making market volumes also transparent will help us. And above all, what we would like to see is that wind energy and the wind industry is seen as a strategic sector, so it gets all the funding and support that other strategic sectors get. This would really help us in reaching our goals and deliver on the African energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefano?
Yeah. Now, look, from my side, I think two key messages I would like to convey. The first one is that things are happening. There are a number of things that are happening. I think it's always good to flag that there has been good work on a number of projects. Let me mention just a few. You know, next year we will inaugurate the AEGEI power plant, Guru Banda power plant. We are electrifying hospital and school in Gambia together with our colleagues from EIB. Nachtigal hydropower plant in Cameroon is a big project. This is coming to fruition. So I want to say there is good work that is hitting the ground. So let's not forget that. So that is the first element. Of course, is this sufficient? No, it's not sufficient. We need to do more. We feel this responsibility on us together with all the partners, the actors in the energy area. We know that, we have to deliver on a number of announcements, objectives that we have flagged. So there is a lot of work to do. And of course, this requires, let's say, to deepen the conversation with the partner countries, to go ahead with the number of work tracks that we have initiated. For instance, we are just now finalizing the identification of the project under the FSD Plus, the new guarantee agreement that we will be signing with the partner financial institution. So we know that there is a lot of work ahead of us in the next 12, 18 months. There is no room for complacency. So we will do our best.
Thank you. Marcos?
Yeah, I think it's good to remind us that a lot of stuff is happening. It's true. But as you said, I think acceleration is needed, because with this energy crisis, we really have to make sure that it leads to an acceleration of the transition and not a postponement, which is the risk that we face. And for that, we need a solid planning framework. We need a good framework for investments. And then some support from the budget, some risk-taking from institutions like ourselves, some signaling and structuring where we can do. And ultimately, we need daring policymakers, daring politicians, and daring entrepreneurs and investors who seek the opportunity. We can only support the doers, and ultimately, we need some people who will go in there and see the opportunity and bring about the change.
Thank you. Johan? Any closing comments?
Thank you, Kande. Just some technical difficulties. I am very encouraged that we can do this. I think I need to say no more than this is happening on the ground. I think we can speed it up, and very encouraged about the future. Thanks.
We welcome the Africa EU Green Energy Initiative. We're going to continue this dialogue on the 15th at the ministerial level. EU ministers and African ministers will have a similar session to discuss the initiative. We hope you'll join us. That event will be organized again by the Africa-Europe Foundation and the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. We thank you very much. A lot to do. We have some seed money, and we have some willing institutions like EIB willing to work with the EU to leverage additional capital, but the work eventually lies on the African governments as well, making the space, the regulatory space and the policy space for investments to come in. Thank you for joining us. Let's thank our panel.